Hi everyone. Can you hear? Is that on? Yeah. I'm going to take this off. Actually. So I'm Paul Austin. I'm the founding partner of Made Thought, and we set up 18 years ago, which seems like a lifetime. Just if you don't know anything about Made Thought, in brief, we're a branding studio based in London, and we work with a variety of clients across lots of different industries, all with a very similar ambition, and that's to have a very high level of creative appetite in the brands they create. What I thought I'd do today, I was going to just sort of take you on a history of us, but that even bores me, so it would be even more boring for you. So what I thought I'd do is I'd talk a little bit about our process and what our thoughts are on the creative industry that I'm involved in of today. So the first provocative statement is the graphic design studio is dead. Now, what I mean by that is, even in the last few years, I've seen a profound change in what a sort of a typical graphic design studio needs to be today. And in the world of branding and brand creation that we exist in, it's definitely no longer about a logo, a color palette, and a typeface. It actually sort of it resonates with what Johannes was saying. Actually, it needs to be more than that. We're building worlds. We're building universes around these products, these entities, these people. So, you know, we have a really rapidly changing creative landscape. So what I'm seeing and what I encourage our guys to do in the studio is we need to think more widely. As creatives now, we've got a responsibility to actually understand and react to the world we live in. And how I see it is that actually in doing that, you know, from a brand's point of view, this exists on, you know, the brands today exist on so many different platforms that I think, you know, the responsibility we have is to create what I call joined up experiences. And at Made Thought, as it says here, what we call that is simply desire. This can be illustrated actually in this first project that I'm going to talk about for a company called GF Smith, and this talks about how something that is a very kind of, I suppose in some ways, a mundane product, even they have to be a lot more expressive and a lot more interesting in how they act as a brand. So we were commissioned some time ago to sort of completely reinvent their brand and really breathe some life into the business. So as well as create the normal things, the new logo, the typeface, the color palette, we've been involved with everything that their brand does creatively on a daily basis. This is just a really short snapshot to do that. Oh, I've got no music. I haven't got any sound actually on the video. It's fine. So this you can see from this. It's a lot better with music actually. No, it's actually not connected. Doesn't have one of those ports. Okay, not to worry. As you can see from here, you know, we know it's a paper brand, but it's far more than just identity and marketing. This is about creating experiences. We look at their retail spaces. We look at their digital presence. I mean, just how we represent paper in a digital way is even that is kind of a complex challenge. Oh, there we go. It's a little bit better. You know, we've obviously got. It was a curse actually, because this is a brand where everything this company does goes out to graphic designers. So we were always going to be somewhat shot down by the rest of the graphic design community. So very early on in the project, we made the decision that we weren't really going to use graphic design to talk about this brand. We would just talk about the materiality. We'd use the product. We would use paper in as interesting ways as possible, whether that's creating an exhibition, whether that's creating, you know, even as I say, a digital environment. We do all of their kind of their strategy, their creative strategy, and we also we also create content for them out of simple ideas. We even work on their architectural space, that they have a kind of a show space in London. We encourage them to create a paper that was made of used coffee cups. So, you know, all of this is not graphic design. This is about kind of brand thinking. This is about making kind of intelligent, you know, moves for a business in order for them to stay relevant, to stay interesting, to stay exciting. What you're seeing here was a simple idea. We thought we'd try and find out what the world's favorite color was. So we created an online tool that allowed people to select a color, put some words to it that they thought reflected that color, and then an algorithm was written that actually allowed us to sort of calculate. I'd love to say we did that bit, we didn't. Allowed them to calculate what the most common color was, or the favorite color, and then that then went on, and other brands got involved, and they did products in those colors. So, you know, this is about creating an ecosystem. A brand has to behave in a way that that keeps them fresh and keeps them kind of relevant across all different platforms. Just an example of some of the things. It was really lovely, actually. These are some of the words that people wrote about the colours they chose, and they were fascinating. They became almost like poetry. You know, the colour of clean, just calm energy. Things that people wrote, and actually, we created so much content off the back of that they're using within their social media now, and all that sort of stuff. So it was really satisfying, actually, allowing the audience to create essentially the brand communications. And that was the favourite colour, if anyone was curious. So I think what that leads on to is what we really believe branding is about. And I actually really can't stand the term, but it seems to be the one that everyone uses. But what I actually see it as is behaviour. And we just saw that with GF Smith. What a brand looks like is really important. But actually how it behaves is, I think, what defines it. And I think, you know, there's huge temptation for graphic designers to think that creating some nice graphic design is what it needs to be. But actually, you know, if you're working with clients that have a sort of a commercial aspect to them, or then that's not enough. And actually, one example where this can really be illustrated for us was about a year and a half ago. We were successful. We won the global pitch to evolve the brand identity for MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Now, it started as a long list of 20 creative studios were asked to send their portfolio, their creds in, and then that was slimmed down to a five-way creative pitch. And we sort of discussed it long and hard in the studio about how we were going to tackle it. And we kind of gambled on the fact that we were pretty sure that every one of those studios couldn't resist the temptation of designing a new logo for MoMA. And we thought, well, that's something that maybe we shouldn't do, because it's an icon. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not broken. The strategy that they'd done before we were involved, that actually informed the brief, actually highlighted that the troubles that MoMA were having with, you know, just trying to keep their attendance up and everything, was the fact that the public found them cold, and they found them unengaging, and they found them over-intellectualized and sometimes quite aloof, particularly to young people who actually live in and around the 5 boroughs in New York. So for us, the solution to this wasn't about a new logo. It was about actually a change in behavior. How do MoMA create a personality that actually allowed them to talk more openly to their audience, and not just tourists, not just the highbrow art world. Actually, you know, the man on the street, someone who thinks that MoMA might not be for them. So, you know, we started sort of, you know, coming up with these ideas about how can they talk. You know, the art world actually has very little opinion. They often, you know, they're too sometimes worried that they might overpower the artist that they're promoting at the time, or the show they're doing. So they never really inform sometimes why they show what they show, or who it might be aimed at. So, just creating kind of really strong typographic advertising that just kind of really spells it out to people that, MoMA is for everyone. It's open. It doesn't matter who you are, what you're into, there is something there for you. So it was this kind of thinking that actually really kind of inspired the director of MoMA. And then it went on to a huge project of just creating everything that the brand, that the MoMA, it is a brand, it is a very kind of commercial organisation, but the institution itself, we know everything from we obviously did all of the graphic elements, but we created new photography for them, we created the new digital platform, all of the communications and the advertising and how they actually talk to people around the gallery, and did a lot of the promotions for some of the more recent shows. This is the first one that was actually based around fashion. First time MoMA's ever done a non-art show, which was quite interesting. They obviously have their PS1 space down in Long Island that we did all kind of some more of the funkier stuff for. And it just grew. This was a huge project that just kind of the more and more we scratched beneath the surface. They have an entire retail brand. They have an entire, sort of an education brand that they all kind of, all has to feed into one common overarching sort of message. So I think, what this showed, that actually by being more human in the language and being more direct in the way that they spoke to people, it really worked. And one of the simplest ones were on the front doors of MoMA, it's quite an imposing entrance. And it used to say entrance. So we just changed it to welcome. And actually even those tiny gestures, I know they sound really small, but actually they do make a difference. This actually is an interesting advert on the right. This was the first time, I think in 50 years, that by doing what we did, and this was at the time that Donald Trump came to power, so there was some arguments going on in New York. It was the first time that we inspired the senior board there to actually have a voice, have an opinion. I mean, this is the place that was set up to show a new kind of art, a new progressive, sometimes, provocative, challenging body of artworks back in the 30s. So, and then they were all about having a message, but obviously as time's gone on and they have trustees and they have a lot of kind of, there's a lot of financial mechanisms that mean that actually they can't always be as forthright as they want to be. So we actually encouraged Glenn, the director, to actually do something that wasn't an advert in the New York Times. They would normally just run that current show and it would be very sort of like tactical. We said, just say something. And he felt very strongly at the time that, art was one method of actually speaking out against the establishment. So this advert on the right was actually run in the New York Times. It was the first typographic ad that MoMA had done without any artwork. So things like that actually make a change, and they actually tell people that an organisation stands for something, how they behave. It's not about graphic design, it's about behaviour. We asked them to ask questions and give answers, actually have conversations with the audience. They were doing a show on Frank Lloyd Wright, and they had this archive of the most amazing drawings of all of his kind of imaginary architecture of things. So this was a concept, you can't really see the sketch, but it was a concept for a farm, a self-sustaining farm that could feed. The idea was to service an ever-growing population. Now, old MoMA would have just put that picture and said, Frank Lloyd Wright unpacking the archive, without any real kind of reason. So we just said, well, simply just make it a Q&A. Ask a question, ask people to think, and then give them the answer. It's saying the same information, but it's giving it context. And I think all this comes down to encouraging them to actually have a voice. I think one bit of advice is in some of the notes that the guys here gave us was, give some advice to creatives and give people kind of, sort of a lead on things that are important to us. And the one thing that I think we've really realised over time is that understanding the person that's going to actually receive what you're creating is vital. I see lots of designers that are quite self-indulgent and they're creating things that they just want to create, and that's cool. I mean, we all have to be proud of the work we do, and we have to love the aesthetic and it's the craft. But actually, if you've got some insight into the people that you're creating for, then sometimes it can lead you in different directions. And to illustrate that, one of our clients is Stella McCartney, the fashion designer. She does a lot of work with Adidas. She does collections for them. We've worked with Stella for many years now. And actually, as that collection has grown, you realise actually there are different parts to the collection. You know, one is kind of gym gear for young mums who go to the gym, and they all want to look good. They want to look cool. You know, then you've got the kind of what I would say the more serious sportswear. So there's a whole tennis collection that is actually worn by some of the most, you know, the female champions at Wimbledon. But then also, so Stella came along and said, I'm doing a new thing. It's for a really young girl. It's like 16, 17. She's obsessed with everything digital. She lives in a digital world. What can we do? The fact of the matter is that we couldn't do the same thing for all those different people, but it had to come under the same DNA of what the Stella McCartney Adidas relationship is. So, you know, we've been working with both brands, Stella and Adidas, for a while, creating various kind of communications and pieces of branding and merchandise and packaging and all of the usual things, but they're kind of nuanced to different audiences. I want to turn this up, actually. I don't know how to do that. Okay, maybe not. So this is the kind of the main brand. Is there any way I can turn the volume up on this? I don't know how you do that. It's disappeared. Yeah, that's going to end. It's fine. This has got, again, really big soundtracks. But, you know, this is actually some of the more recent stuff that's actually for the more performance related stuff. You know, we make a lot of films now. You know, for us, it's about creating content. So we're not creating static imagery anymore. The last time someone asked us to create a still campaign was a long, long time ago. So now everyone, you know, the desire is to create moving image and create kind of things to assets that can go across social media and on the internet and things. So we've got a large body of work that services one type of consumer. But then when you look at the younger crowd, it's a real shame this is not louder, but we create a digital universe. We work with some 3D artists, and we created these kind of almost video game environments that these girls lived in. They can relate to. They're much more colourful, much more vibrant, much cooler, much kind of ephemeral, and they're a hell of a lot of fun making, because you're working with people that you wouldn't normally come in contact with. And then the other one is some of the more serious stuff. So on the top right corner, you've got one of the tennis films that we made for the real high-end collection, and we motion tracked a tennis ball, and we had Karolina Wozniak in a studio. We only had her for 20 minutes because they're very busy, these high-end sports people, and so we had to sort of film her really efficiently, and then everything we tracked the ball, and then we did everything else in post. But it was again, just about being relevant to the audience. So this went out into a much more serious crowd, and they could really relate to the kind of what we were getting to. I think the one thing that we always try and do at Made Thought is you know, there's always conventions in any kind of category of branding, whether you work in, you know, fashion or product, furniture, or you know when you're working with these brands, there's a kind of a convention how furniture brands want to be seen. There's a convention how fashion brands want to be seen. So if we can, and it's not always possible, wherever I always encourage the guys in the studio to challenge the categories, because at the end of the day, no one wants more of the same. And it can be quite subtle. I mean, this is some work we're doing at the moment for a really interesting young brand based in New York. It's skincare, but it's not skincare that you put on your skin. It's actually supplements that you take, and it's kind of skin care from the inside. Very healthy, you know, super organic, very kind of, you know, it's really interesting subject matter. So when we spoke to them, they didn't have a lot of money, you know, but they were cool, so we were like, definitely want to be involved with you guys. So we kind of tried to say, well, okay, well, skincare always looks like that. How can we do something different? So we just created these really interesting sort of typographic illustrations of the benefits that a product might bring, and just really resolutely stayed with this kind of very simple typographic approach that actually very quickly created a new little niche in the market, and it's it's happened across all kind of parts of their activity. So from digital, this all animates and everything, and it just kind of it's trying to take the science out of it and actually make it more human. It's got mistakes in it and things, and actually because there's a whole thing about the body's not perfect, and actually we should sort of celebrate that, and especially when you're talking about the skincare from the inside. So you can challenge the category. You can still stay within it, but actually doing something a little bit different just allows us to create a sense of newness and a kind of a fresh aesthetic within some of the people we work with. Another one is, again in a similar world, is I don't know if anyone's done any work with fragrance companies in the past, but they are incredibly conventional. The conventions around the design of fragrance, whether it's a bottle through to an image, is incredibly conventional. To the point, if you suggested to someone that you were going to shoot a model and they weren't looking directly at camera, they would think you're crazy, because it's just what you do in that world. It's a very kind of Parisienne thing that's been owned for a long, long time. And Frederick Malle, who's a very high-end perfumer, he came to us to work on his brand and to create a series of kind of adverts, really, but things that actually told the artistic, conceptual story of his fragrances. So we actually set about making a series of these, what were kind of very, very unconventional kind of films and images that actually really got to what was inside Frederick's head when he commissioned each of these fragrances. And what that allowed was actually us to create a very unusual palette of assets for them, which in the fragrance world, this is a brand owned by Estee Lauder. Right, so they look at it and they do not know what we're talking about, because it bucks every single thing that they would normally do. However, they have every faith in Frederick and what he stands for and the amazing fragrances he creates, and they understand that there is more of an artistic, more of a kind of a conceptual background to the work. So we kind of jumped on that with him and allowed us to do very different advertising and very different kind of digital work for this brand. That's an advert that goes into magazines for a fragrance, and as a double page spread, it's quite unusual in that sense. You can still tell it's for a fragrance, but it's got a much higher sort of cultural cachet to it, which obviously keeps us a bit happier. Just little things. A lot of our work it can be just social media assets, because in the days where you might create a whole big activation around something, today people are they're spending less money, they're putting it into social, and we've got to be clever to actually find nice ways to actually make that still as creative, still as fun, still as engaging as we can. Obviously we still get to do packaging and that kind of stuff. One thing that you might have seen is recently something that's become very important to us as a studio is as designers we always have a duty, I think, to make positive change, and that's not just about being creative. I think the idea that we can just carry on making more stuff is a dated concept. Obviously there's always new things that need to be made, but how we make them and what we make them from is a really interesting creative challenge. Something we've been doing of late is working with an organisation called A Plastic Planet, and it's encouraging other retailers, other brands to actually use a lot less plastic in their activities, and that could be anyone from a food brand to a cosmetics brand to could even be an electronics brand with the packaging they make and that kind of thing. So we created this kind of quite strong, quite sort of powerful visual identity for them. But what's been really rewarding is actually doing a lot of the work for specific activities. So in Holland, we've just completed the first completely plastic-free area of a supermarket, where every single product on the shelf is it uses no plastic. It uses new materials that are biodegradable, that are progressive, sustainable, And I think for us, again, this isn't about graphic design, this comes back to behaviour. This is about how we should be acting on the behalf of the people we work with. So actually, you know, on the face of it, that looks like a normal supermarket aisle, and there are things that look like they're in plastic bags. It's not plastic. It's a different material. It's a different substrate made of cornstarch and things like that that actually do exactly the same job. So, you know, in doing that, and this has just won a, you know, it's won a lot of praise. It's in the Design Museum in London at the moment. They've actually rebuilt the aisle in the entranceway, and actually, it's something that we're seeing a lot of activity. What really annoys me are when clients come and say, "Oh yeah, we should be doing something in the kind of plastic thing, because everyone's doing that." No, don't do it because everyone else is doing it. Do it because you believe you have to. And that is where, you know, as well as creating beautiful pieces of packaging for people and graphic design and all of the usual branding things, for me, this is where it becomes really fulfilling, because actually you know that you're able to combine not just an aesthetic statement, but actually something that actually creates a really meaningful and hopefully longer lasting sort of legacy. And the last thing is something that we're sort of, you know, we've just started, and I'll talk a little bit about it, is we all get wrapped up in doing work for other people, particularly in the world that we exist in. And sometimes it's really important to actually create outside of that. So we originally started by this whole concept that you're about to see started life really as we were going to create a printed piece as a sort of a leave behind when we met new people, new clients, and it was going to be a kind of a nice book of our work, really as a kind of as a reaction to the fact that everybody, you know, everyone just shows their work digitally now. It's like a PDF file or go on the website, and it's just a bit, there's no tactility, there's no tangible value to it. So we were like, we really should have something that feels great. So the conversation started as, you know, let's do some photography, let's print something so we can give people a book. Well, that didn't kind of feel enough, or it didn't really feel reflective of the reason we called Made Thought Made Thought. Now, the reason Made Thought's called Made Thought is the two sides of design. You've got the tangible craft, the making, the objects that we create, but you've also got the conceptual, intellectual thinking that actually drives that making. So when Ben and I first, all those years ago, actually were trying to find a name, we wanted something that reflected both sides of the process. And so we had make and think. That sounded a bit too obvious. So we then went made and thought and sort of pushed them together. And it became a very unusual name at the time. People remembered it. We had to spell it. We still have to spell it out 1,000,000 times on the phone when we're talking to people. But apart from that, once they hear it, they don't forget it. But actually, it's always been there, that kind of side to the studio that is a slightly more kind of intellectual, conceptual thinking approach. But it's, unless the people that consume the work we do are actually in that original presentation where we get a chance to explain the thinking, it gets lost by the time you pick something up off a shelf. You know, you're reacting to it as a piece of design. So we wanted to do something that actually just addressed that. So rather than do a brochure of our work, we actually embarked on creating our own journal. This is the first issue. It's available from our website. And essentially, we thought it'd be a really nice sentiment to not just tell people what we think, but actually reflect the conversations we have with the people we work with. We work with some really amazing people. We work with Tom Dixon, the product designer, Stella McCartney, fashion. We work with Craig Robbins over in Miami on the Miami the Miami Design District. We work with the guys at MoMA. We work with people from lots of sort of international influence, creative influence, cultural influence. So actually, to sort of a testament to the relationships we have with them, we invited them, 8 of them, just to hold conversations. So we paired them up, awkward pairings. So you might have Tom Dixon in conversation with Frederick Marl. You've got, you know, they're at completely different mindsets. You bring them together to have a conversation. We set a question, and we kind of were in the conversation. So the first one was, how do we go deeper in a shallow world? So how do we, you know, in the world of you know, social media. I did an interview with the guys here, and one of the questions was, you know, what do I feel about the meme culture at the moment? I'm like, I just don't. It means nothing to me. It's just it's superfluous. It's ephemeral. There's, you know, it hasn't got the depth. It hasn't got, you know, the thinking that, you know, we look for in our work. So this was a kind of a piece that actually addressed that, and actually it was really inspiring, because all of a sudden you're creating conversations with the people that you've done work for, but it's in a different context. And simply, you know, we recorded the conversations, and then we just created a typographic journal that had very few pictures. It was all about picking it up and reading it. And actually, what was refreshing was, it's been stocked in a couple of bookshops. It's sold incredibly well, and the majority of people have actually said about it is, oh, it's so nice to actually not be bombarded with loads of pictures, and actually have, the idea was to take a moment, pick something up that's physical, take a breath, slow down, read. You might agree with some of the thoughts, you might disagree, but actually it's just trying to encourage people just to kill the pace a little bit, get off their smartphone, and actually, you know, enjoy something that's tactile and physical. And so this was just a couple of some of the spreads from it. It's something that we're going to try and do every 3 months, so 4 a year. The second one is about sustainability, and about actually, you know, and we've got some great people involved with that. James Dyson, Stella McCartney, you know, they're going to have those same sort of conversations. It's going to be a different context. We're not just going to do you'll see. But, you know, what's been great for the studio, and it's creating something like this that is as valuable conceptually as any of the work that we do for other people. But it allows people to, you know, put their thoughts down on paper in the studio and actually have a view. And that's us. Thanks very much.